How are you?
Hey, Katie, it's great to see you. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, so am I. Thank you so much, as always, for participating in this segment, continuing the conversation. I think it's so valuable for all of our viewers who their questions didn't get answered last month during the monthly webinar. So I'm really excited.
No, I feel the same way. We always get so many good questions in, and there's just no way in an hour to get to all of them. So I'm glad we can at least address a few more today.
Yeah, exactly. So why don't we get started? The first question we have today is, why does President Biden fail to garner more support?
Boy, that is a very broad question. And here we have a president who's running probably pretty close to even in public opinion polls. And in fact, I'd say over the last few weeks, it appears that he has ticked up just a little bit. But what seems to be underlying that question is that by most traditional measures, the nation's economy is doing very well. And so a lot of observers are puzzled that Biden is not in a more advantageous position against Trump. And I think mainly what's happening here is if you do focus specifically at economic matters, while unemployment is low and other traditional indicators are very strong, inflation was so high during Biden's first years in office. And some people blame that on the pandemic. Some people blame that on Biden's spending, Biden administration spending in reaction to the pandemic. But regardless, even though the rates of inflation increase are not nearly what they were early in Biden's term, this is the first time we've had a serious bout with inflation since the early 1980s. And a very large majority of the American people have never had experience with such rapidly rising prices before. And they seem to be taking it out on Biden. There are other issues on which voters have indicated their preference for Trump over Biden, most notably issues like immigration and crime. But as we've talked about plenty of times and will continue to talk about over the course of the year on the webinar, the two things that the Biden campaign believes will ultimately lead him to victory are number one, the ongoing debate over abortion and reproductive rights in this country in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision 2 years ago. And then what they refer to very broadly as the democracy issue, which is a very polite way of them talking about how they, the Biden campaign, intend to remind voters about many of the things that those voters did not like about Donald Trump, most notably his reaction to the events of January 6th. So it does look like it's going to be a close race, but I would say that lingering inflation, still hanging in higher than many people had expected and that Biden's team had hoped, really is what is keeping this race so close right now.
Very interesting. Thank you. And for our next question, is it possible to fully support Israel but completely distrust and disapprove of Netanyahu?
Also, a very good question. And I suspect that the questioner themselves reflects that sort of duality. But I will say we've actually just seen polling come out in the last few days that shows that while a majority of Americans and a majority of American Jews do still strongly support Israel, that there is growing disapproval for the prime minister of that country, Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, some very ardent Zionists will say that if you don't support this current government, you are not being supportive of Israel. But a majority of Americans and a majority of American Jews don't agree with that and actually do indicate a support for the nation while expressing reservations for the course of action that Netanyahu has charted, not only since October 7th, but before that as well.
Great. And our last question of the day is if Mike Johnson brings Ukraine support to the floor, will his extreme right wing try to strip him of his speakership? And if they do, will the Democrats stop them?
So, Katie, I have to say this is a totally unfair question because we're recording this on Thursday, the 18th, if I'm not mistaken, of April,
Yep.
roughly 48 hours before Johnson brings this bill to the floor. It's actually supposed to come up on Saturday, in all likelihood Saturday evening, so a little bit more than 2 full days, which means by the time that most of our members have watched this, the vote will have already taken place. So I feel like I'm at a total disadvantage here. But what I'll say anyway is it appears, at least right now in advance of the vote, that while conservative Republicans are very strongly in opposition to all 4 or 5 of the bills that Johnson intends to bring up this weekend, including one for Ukraine, one for Israel, and one for Taiwan, and others as well, it appears in advance that there's sufficient Democratic support to actually move that bill out of the House. Joe Biden indicated on Wednesday of this week that he would sign these bills if passed, which is a pretty strong signal that the Senate would pass them also. But what I think is worth keeping in mind, whether these bills pass or not, and in particular, even if the Ukraine bill does, that still doesn't guarantee an outcome in the broader war effort. It's worth noting that with or without US aid, Russia has made very significant gains over the last several months. And while there's no question that additional aid from the US or Europe or elsewhere would certainly be of great help to Ukraine, it doesn't guarantee anything. And at this point, an increasing number of observers, even those who very strongly support Ukraine, are beginning to wonder quietly whether ultimately there's going to have to be some type of peace treaty that in fact does allow Russia to keep some portion of Ukraine's eastern region under Russian control. So make no mistake about it, Saturday is a very important vote. Like I said, early on, a couple of days out, it looks like there's enough Democratic support to help this Republican speaker get it across. But either way, it's worth noting that this vote, while important, is not seminal, and Ukraine still really does have a lot of ground to make up in their war effort against Russia.
So interesting. Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for recording this segment. I'm already really looking forward to seeing you again in a few weeks for the May edition of the Dan Schnur Political Report.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it too. As you know, I'm not wild about the name of the political report, but otherwise, I'm really looking forward to it also. And I hope that our loyal audience members can get something of benefit out of this. And if it turns out that I was wrong in my last assessment, I expect to hear about it from all of them. So great to see you, Katie, and thanks to all of you for joining us and being part of our conversations.